Hello, I'm Oliver Picard and welcome to beautiful Limousin, France. Now then, in last week's episode, if you haven't seen it, go check it out. I took apart my new project car, but in that video I mentioned that I've also dug up my garden. And that is what today's episode is about, because I've done it for a very good reason. My house has no grey water system, and my dream is to one day have a fully off-grid shower that's completely carbon neutral. So I want to get water from my land, I want to filter it, I want to have a nice hot shower with it, and then when I'm done with that water, I want to be able to put it back into the land without damaging any of my local ecosystem. And the way you do that is by using a bacterial filter. Now, for the last year and a bit, I've had two giant black obelisks. They're like the obelisks from 2001: A Space Odyssey, but obese. They're like these big black containers sat right in front of my house with awful things to look at. But they are one of the most important parts of my house. And before I can start doing interiors or anything like that, the bones, the fundamental infrastructure of my house is the most important thing. More important than floors, more important than lighting, more important than anything. Because every time I turn on a tap, where my water goes is vital. So these big obelisks, what they basically do, they're called a clear fox filter. You can check them out online if you put it into Google. And a clear fox filter is basically a bacterial filter that takes water from hand washing, from showers, baths, from your washing machine, and then it goes through a bacterial two-stage filter, and then by the time it enters the land, it's completely clean and just as it came out of the land in the first place. So in theory, I can take water from my well, I can heat it up using my auger, I can then have a bath with it, and then I can put it straight back into the land. So I can have an off-grid, carbon neutral, completely environmentally friendly house, but I can also have a nice warm bath in winter, because that's the whole idea of this thing. The whole idea of my house is to prove that you can have a wonderful, comfortable and luxurious lifestyle completely carbon neutral. So the fact that you don't have to make sacrifices and live in a mud hut in order to have a lifestyle that doesn't damage the planet. That's just an added bonus. So I'll show you them, shall I? Come on. So this is my clear fox filter. Now this is not a septic tank. My human waste does not go into these filters. My toilets in my house are actually dry toilets. They are composting toilets rather than having a septic system. And the reason is I grow my food on this land, and septic tanks can leak, and not only that, they cost money to empty. And that's not good either. Right? That's another bill. And the whole idea of being off-grid is that I don't want bills. I want to be completely as free from bills and paying unnecessary stuff as possible. So all my human gubbins is composted and is dry toileted. So these filters just deal with the water that comes from my bath, from my kitchen sink, from my washing machine, that kind of thing. So they're a lot smaller than a septic tank, and they never have to be emptied. These are bacterial filters. So the water passes from this tube, from my house, into filter A, and then it goes into filter B, and then there is a 15 metre or 50 foot runoff. And these filters are huge. They're about 2 meters tall when they stood on the land, and I didn't dig these holes out by hand. I'm very lucky, and I have some very wonderful neighbours who are farmers, and I asked one of my neighbours to borrow his digger, and he came in his digger and spent 2 days digging out these trenches. And thank goodness, because otherwise it would have been absolute months. However, we have had some troubles in that there's basically an organisation in France that are in charge of inspecting before you put either a clear fox filter like this in, or this is the first one in Limousin, by the way, but they inspect before you put a filter like this in, or they inspect before you put a septic tank in, and then once you've put it in, they inspect it again, And so when you apply to put one of these in your land, they come and inspect your plans and your land and see if it will work for you. And they tell you, yes, you can have one, or no, you can't. And they're the ones that told us the soakaway had to be 15 meters, and it also had to be 2 meters deep. But what they couldn't see is that I have bedrock under my land. My land is basically on the granite, and right at the end of this pipe, I'll show you. The second trench that we've dug is this vent pipe, and this vent pipe basically allows the bacteria to breathe and removes any bacterial gases that are produced by the cleaning of the water. And this pipe runs all the way up to the side of my house. If I move this ladder, you'll be able to see that here is a very large lump of granite, and it's it's huge. And so it took 4 days to grind away this part of the stone. And the reason is the exit pipe for the clear fox actually goes past this this stone, and so we couldn't move the clear fox, so we had to move the stone. So that took 5 diamond cutting discs and 4 days to get through. It is insanely hard. If you can hear birds chirping, by the way, the sparrows are going a bit crazy this morning. But yeah, it just took absolutely ages, and I've pulled my knee, unfortunately. I had a bit of an accident while pickaxing out the other end of this trench. I've pulled my knee, so I'm on light duties for the next couple of days, unfortunately. This is one of those things where it's very easy to get frustrated when you're building your own house. These things do happen. And obviously pulling my knee means I'm on light duties. I can't do as much as I'd like to do, and you've just got to kind of take it in your stride and understand that getting frustrated at it's not going to help you. You know, getting frustrated at the fact that I've pulled my knee isn't going to help me get better any quicker, and I can't force it because then I'll just end up more hurt, and so I've just got to rest. But we've been at this now for 2 weeks. This has been a major job. And that's the other thing about YouTube as well, like not everything that you do can be done in a week in order to make next week's video. It's just reality. And down here at the other end of the trench, we have this giant granite boulder. Now, that's a huge problem, obviously, because it just cannot be cut through. So what we're having to do is go around it and then go uphill, because we have another boulder there and another boulder next to it. So we're actually having to go up the hill and then dig it down, so that our soakaway goes uphill, but it actually goes downhill, if that makes any sense at all. Boulders like this, you simply don't know are here until you start digging into the ground. Because millions of years ago, a giant glacier, a giant block of ice, basically, slid down this valley, creating the valley. It gouged out the earth, and with it, it brought stone. So actually, this granite boulder could be from, you know, 100 kilometers away, and has been brought by that giant block of ice all the way down here and plonked in the middle of my garden for me to find when I start digging my clear fox. But it cannot be, it can't be moved, it can't be lifted, it can't be cut, so it just has to be navigated. This is one of the issues with doing things with hand tools and stuff like that. The digger can't dig around it. There's no way around it other than maybe dynamite. So what we've got to do is we've just got to pickaxe around it and navigate it. And even the stuff that's not granite is gritstone, and gritstone is very difficult to cut, but you can't dig it with a digger, but you can dig it with a pickaxe, which is what I've been doing, and why I pulled my knee, because I was actually in here digging this when I pulled my knee. But it's very hard going. You'll get maybe, you know, 20 centimeters a day out of it working in the morning. I've been working since about 6 o'clock in the morning every morning, getting up before the sun comes up, because it's pretty warm at this time of year in beautiful Limousin, France. But it's just part of it. It's part of living in a glacial valley that's so beautiful, and you know, you never know these things until you start digging into them. let me show you around the back of the house because we have more digging that needs doing around there. I've come around the back of my house to actually where my back door will be to show you another side of groundworks that can be required for historic homes that have nothing to do with things like foundations or building a new building, and that just because you're not building a new building doesn't mean you won't have to do a ton of groundworks. You see, I'm sure you can see how high the ground level has built up over the centuries. This is where I'm actually stood. This ground level will be where my back doorstep is. And the ground has risen over the last 400 years over a metre. Now, part of that is due to erosion because obviously land moves over time. But a bigger part of it is actually worms. You see, I live in a place that's very wooded. We have a lot of oak forest and we have a very high ground water level. It's one of the reasons why my garden's so fertile. And that creates giant worms. In fact, some of the worms in this land that we've found have been over 30 centimetres long. That's over a foot for you imperial folk. They're absolutely huge. And what happens is, every single autumn when everything dies back, you know, a lot of this vegetation that I'm surrounded by dies back and all the leaves fall off the trees, the worms come up at night and drag all the leaves and leaf litter and decomposing vegetation underground to eat, and all that decomposes. Now, believe it or not, worms can add up to 50 millimeters of ground height per year. Think about that, 5 centimeters or 2 inches roughly of ground height per year just from worms. So over 400 years, obviously that's going to compact down over 400 years, but all that, you know, 400 years of worms adding a maximum of say 5 centimeters and a minimum of say, you know, maybe 1 centimeter in a really bad year when we had bad weather or it was really dry or whatever and there wasn't as much food. But either way, 400 years of all that worm action massively builds up land. And a lot of historic homes, people say, oh, they're really damp and oh, they have a lot of damp issues and damp problems. And the reason for that, the biggest reason, is because the land around the house is actually built up over time. And it doesn't take a lot, believe it or not. It can be, you know, 30 centimeters. And in a house that is 300 years old or even 200 years old, you can get, you know, 30 centimeters to 60 centimeters. And that can make an absolutely, you know, that's the difference between where I'm stood and here. And all that is damp earth against your walls. And a lot of people get a builder in who isn't acquainted with historic buildings, and the builder goes, oh yes, you need this really invasive damp proof course, because they're used to modern buildings that are made of cement and that require a damp proof course. But of course this is a lime plaster building, this is a lime building and doesn't require a damp proof course at all, because lime is actually very good at shedding moisture on its own. It doesn't need any help. But what it does do, what it does need, is it needs the damp earth moving away from the wall, and then the wall can breathe. So a lot of historic homes that you'll see, you'll notice the windows are very low to the floor and things like that. And the reason for that can be that people used to be shorter, yes, but a lot of it is also because the land around the building has slowly and gradually built up over the centuries and is actually swallowing the house. And it's a really common problem, and it's something that a lot of people don't consider. And so I'm actually going to have to dig out all the back of this house completely. To give you some more perspective, I've come inside the house just to show you this is the hole that was behind me when I was talking on the other side of this wall. And you can see how further up the wall it appears, and that's because the exterior ground level is up to here at the highest point. And that just shows you how much the land can rise over the centuries. If you look just down here, there are 2 pipes. This is the water from my well, and this is a water drainage pipe. The first job I ever did when I moved here was to dig all of this out and put that water drainage pipe in. Now, it was just a temporary measure at the time because I wanted to dig my floor out inside the barn to find out what my floor level should be. But what it allowed my house to actually dry out, because I've noticed every time I was pulling one of the floor stones out of the floor, it was actually filling up with water. There was that much damp in my house. And a lot of people buy historic homes or are looking at historic homes, and damp is this big scary thing, but it really needn't be, because a lot of times the damp in the house is simply caused by the amount of earth. I mean, look at where I'm stood. Like, the ground level is up to here, and I'm 6'6". So you can imagine the ground level up to there, and you've got a lot of moisture here. That's going to allow moisture to literally flood into your house. It's this big scary thing to a lot of people, but it needn't be. Often houses just need digging out, and the older your house is, obviously this house being over 400 years old, it needs digging out a lot. But a house that's 100 years old can just need a little bit. A house that's obviously 300 years old might need a lot, you know? And a lot of people as well, on top of digging the land out, you may want to consider what your walls are made of. So for example, this is a lime plaster house. Now this is the original mortar here that you can see, and that's over 400 years old. This is cement that was put in, I'm guessing, in the 70s or 80s. Now this lime is very, very soft. I can pull it away. You can see it dropping down as dust. I can pull it away just with my fingers, and common sense, shall we say, would normally say that's no good, that's not strong enough, and the stronger you make a house out, the stronger the stuff you make a house out of, the better. But the mortar's actually there to keep the stones from touching, because when stones touch, they tend to crack each other and split each other. So your mortar is there as a glue, but it's there also to separate your stones. That's all it's there for. And in a lot of historic homes, you get this. Cement is no good in a historic home. It has no place being anywhere near a historic home. And the reason for that is that in the Second World War, obviously we lost a lot of people. And with that loss, we lost a lot of knowledge. Those people were, you know, builders. Those people were engineers. Those people had a lot of knowledge about historic buildings that they'd got from their masters, that they'd got from their trades people. You know, when they were coming up and when they were learning their trade, they learnt from the people who came before them, who learnt from the people who came before them. And it's amazing how quickly knowledge can be lost. So after the Second World War, a new generation of tradespeople emerged who were all trained in how to build modern brick and mortar buildings, brick and cement. The problem with cement in a historic building is it's far too hard. It's actually, this cement is actually harder than this stone. And what can happen is it can cause cracks because there's too much compression. But also, water can get behind this cement and it can freeze, and that can actually crack the building because it won't move the cement, obviously. It will move the lime mortar. It will crack the lime mortar. That's a huge issue. And a lot of historic buildings that have big cracks running down them, if they're smaller than a fist and they have been restored, I'm betting, I would bet proper money on it, that they are cracked because they've been repaired with cement at one point or another. Now, this issue can actually occur on the other side of the wall as well. A lot of houses have been plastered inside with modern finishing plaster. Modern finishing plaster is, of course, cement based. And because of that, the wall on the other side can't breathe. So even if you've dug all of your house out, around the house, and there's no land built up around your house, if you still have damp, my suggestion would be that it's actually your plaster that's doing it, because this lime needs to breathe. And it needs to breathe inside and it needs to breathe outside. And basically what the lime does, it's really good at soaking up the water, but then it just dispels the water into the atmosphere. It just gets rid of it. Anytime you turn your heating on, your house dries out. And it wicks it away gently over time. But if you then plaster a wall, you've got water vapour disappearing from one side of the wall, but the wall is so thick that you won't get the water from this side, so you'll get damp that builds up behind your plaster, and that obviously invites fungus, which creates damp, and that's what like rising damp and that kind of stuff is. It's literally water that's stuck behind your silly modern plaster because it can't get out, and the only way to get it out is to knock all your plaster off your walls and replaster with lime plaster. And this is something that we've only just figured out in the last 10 years or so, when historic architectural restorers have started testing the makeup of the lime mortar in buildings. Now, if you own a historic building, in the UK for example, where we have lots of preservation laws, you may now be required, my neighbour's driving past, you may now be required to replaster your house or repoint your house in the local lime plaster, which if you're in a very chalky place might involve mixing chalk into lime plaster, or it may even involve mixing horsehair into lime plaster. My house in England that I grew up in was lime and horsehair, and it's a bit like plastering a cat onto your wall when you replaster your walls, but it creates an incredibly strong wall. It's like wall carbon fibre. It's brilliant. Now, whatever you do, don't then use modern paint on top of your beautiful lime plaster walls, because modern paint contains loads of plastic, and that's obviously an issue, because if you think about it, imagine someone has been repainting your house that you live in every 2 to 5 years, say, since the 1960s, with plastic that contains particles of paint. And over those years you're going to basically laminate your walls. Now, we've all seen a laminated sheet, like on a notice board outside your local village, notice board or something like that, where water has got into the lamination and it's got into the paper, and the paper soaks up the water, but obviously it can't escape because of that lamination, that laminated card that's on top of it. That's exactly what happens to your walls. Your walls can't breathe, so you end up with damp problems, and it can simply be a matter of what paint is on your walls. Unfortunately, you've got to strip all of that off. You've got to replaster with lime plaster, and then you'll never have damp ever again, because of course these buildings have been around for the last 400 years, and a lot of them are only having problems since the 1970s. In the UK we have a lot of timber buildings, and there are timber buildings that are far older than my barn, and they've been fined for centuries and centuries and centuries. They had all their original timbers, and then since the 1970s they've all gone rotten, and they're now having to be completely restored and completely rebuilt in many cases, because huge sections of timber like this, huge sections of oak, have completely rotted out. And that is because the moisture gets stuck in the wall, and so then it gets fungal, and then it eats away at the wood, and it eats away at beams, and it eats away at joists that run through your walls. So a lot of places can end up with issues with the first floor even, and a lot of those issues in historic homes, in manor houses and stuff like that, are all caused by cement. Also, if you're eco-minded, bear in mind that 1 ton of concrete produces 1 ton of CO2, whereas lovely lime plaster actually absorbs pollution. So lime plaster over the years becomes carbon negative, whereas cement plaster is forever carbon positive. And because of that, lime plaster is actually being used on many passive houses, which is houses that have no heating system. They are warmed simply by being massively insulated and having people inside them. I'm not a massive fan of passive houses, to be honest. I think that the breathing in and out of people and the moisture that occurs just in daily life and stuff in a house that's so insulated and a house that can't breathe can make a house a bit stuffy and a bit but many people like them. Many people think that they are the way forward. Personally, I think that we're better using the buildings that we've already got, because there are hundreds of thousands of barns, farms and buildings that are historic buildings up and down every single country on this planet that are not being used. And the reason they're not being used is because they are expensive to restore, and it's far cheaper just to build new buildings. That's okay. But building new buildings is destroying our planet as fast as, you know, shipping is, and as fast as burning fossil fuels to heat homes is, and as fast as, you know, making 100 million new cars every year is. And we need to address that. And this is one of the ways that we do it. We use what we've got, and we learn about what we've got, and we learn what it really needs. And when you give a historic home what it really needs, you'll have no damp, you'll have a beautiful house, and it will be beautiful, and it will remain beautiful for another 400 years, which is definitely the plan with this one. So yeah, not your average barn video this week, not your average building your dream video, because I'm basically a one-legged man. But if you've enjoyed this video, please, or if you've got any comments or questions, please let me know down in the comments below. I always make sure I answer every single one of your comments whenever I can. If you're interested in my social media, that's all in the description. If you like this video, please make sure you click like. It tells me that you enjoyed this video, but it also tells YouTube that you enjoyed this video, and that way this video can get recommended to more people. And there may be a bunch of people out there who have damp in their historic homes, who have issues in their historic homes, or are thinking of buying a historic home to restore and not considering that they may need to put a clear fox filter in, and how much work that may involve, or they may need to dig out, and how much that will cost if they are not capable of doing it themselves. So if you have a friend who has a historic home, make sure you share these videos, because you never know, it might just really help someone and save someone an absolute bunch of trouble. I once made a video about a problem I thought only I had, that was a dynamo problem, and I'm still on my classic car, and I'm still getting emails thanking me every single week because there isn't another video out there on the internet about this kind of thing. And the videos like do exist about lime plastering and stuff like that, but if you don't know, then you don't know that you should be looking. So thank you to everybody who's watched this video. Please be awesome to each other, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye bye.